You're in the 06010. Fantasy Focus.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football. My name is Daniel Dopp, and I am joined, as always, by Field Yates and Stephania Bell. We got a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, we're diving into running backs. Huge running back tier show for our first show back, and that's where we're going to start things. First off, Field and Stephania, great to see you both. We're 5 days a week now. We are daily. I hope you had fun summers because they're officially over starting today.
I'm like still in awe of this beautiful studio.
I know.
Can we just talk about if we have space? Like,
are we test driving? Like, you can like go to a car dealership and be like, can I test out the Lambo for a day? You got to be like a high roller to do that, but you can't keep it. We actually live in this studio forever?
It feels like it. So for those of you not watching our YouTube chat, we are in the big studio, Studio W, which was the NFL live set.
Yeah, it is. We're 25 feet away. Dan Orlovsky is doing throwing motions over there
on the
ready
other side,
for the
exactly.
show. Marcus Spears is warming up like only Swagoo can. This is great.
This is going to be a ton of fun.
Awesome.
Very exciting to be able to have a new studio, new digs. If you have not ever watched us on the YouTube channel, go check us out. This is going to be the year that you want to do it because this should be a lot of fun. Definitely level.
How was your offseason, Daniel?
My offseason was pretty good.
Yeah?
It was pretty good. But I got to be honest, I'm ready for the regular season.
Dang.
I had enough offseason that I'm ready to talk about football. One of the things we have not done in a minute, Field,
Yeah.
is talk about, in general, any of the live shows that we've had.
Oh.
And I want to tease something.
Been a while,
here.
hasn't it?
We have a live show that is coming up sometime soon this month. We're going to tell you guys about it. Not today. We got a few more details we got to finalize, but we're heading back out on the road to be able to meet you people to do a very fun live podcast.
I love this.
And we're doing all this before we hit training camp, Stephania, because right now we're in the throes of training camp starting. I'm assuming you're going to be heading out sooner or later like you always do all your training camp
I will be with the
tours.
Dolphins later this week.
Okay.
Wow. Like, is that like a reference to a vacation you're about to take? Like,
No,
swim with the Dolphins? or is
no. This is
The off-season continues.
This is work.
Okay.
This is work.
Got it. Okay.
This is work. This is me going down as I often
on
visit
Tua.
the Dolphins training camp. Yeah.
Dinner on Tua, right? I mean,
Yes.
after that new deal.
After a big deal, dinner is definitely on Tua for
All right,
sure.
by the way, first day back, so you got to apologize. Give us some grace here. Like, this studio is so sweet. Like, if you're watching right now,
I want to watch
there's a
what's
million
behind
camp clips that are just blasting in the background.
cool.
This is so electric. I mean, we have come a long way. I mean, shoot, you've been around since the beginning, Stephania.
Yes.
I think this show was once taped in a shoebox.
I think it was. We were
Actually
literally in a
shocked.
closet. I don't think there was electricity.
Yeah.
It was like,
Matthew
cups
had
and
to actually Pod Vader
phone
would just
lines,
would like bike pedal.
Little
See
hamster wheel.
electricity going somehow, right?
Yeah.
I remember that we had to explain to people what a podcast was
Yeah.
back in the day because they didn't know. Can you imagine with all the podcasts out there? And now we have not only this incredible audio experience, but this beautiful
new
video
studio.
experience. And
so
look at all this.
The only
If I
thing
get
that we-
distracted during the show, don't mind me. I'm just enchanted with all
Yeah,
this.
nothing wrong with that. The only thing we had to do in order to get this studio was just promise that we weren't going to have Mike Clay on the show anymore. So, honestly, it's a win for everyone, I think.
We announce that now.
Can we say that officially? That's not true. We love Mike Clay.
Mike will be back in just a couple
He'll
of
be
days.
back
All right,
later,
so,
yeah.
So good off seasons all the way around.
Yeah.
Okay.
38 days until we start football, Field. That's the big thing for me. I cannot wait, and our goal right now is to be able to get everybody prepared for that. We're going to be talking, like I said, running back tiers in a minute. But first, Stephania,
Yes.
we're doing something that I've never done before, something you've probably done a lot. Yeah. We are going to the Bahamas as Fantasy Focus. I thought this was a joke when our leadership first brought it up to us, but we are heading out to Baha Mar. If you want questions about it, if you want to find out what's going on, you can go to bahamar.com/draft. We are going to do the ultimate draft weekend, have a bunch of different fantasy leagues come out to the Bahamas, come to a resort where the three of us, as well as Mike Clay, are going to be there. We're going to help you pick your draft orders. We got a bunch of games lined up. We got a bunch of Q&As. We're going to help you draft with your draft board. It is going to be the ultimate draft weekend of a lifetime. Stephania, I appreciate you letting us stay in your long-term cabana suite because obviously you already have a place down there.
Yes.
Listen, I am so excited about this. You have no idea. I was like, not only are we combining like my favorite thing to do this time of year, which is draft and play fantasy football, but we're doing it at my favorite location, which is the beach.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
there will be umbrella drinks.
There will
Make
be
no
umbrella
mistake.
drinks.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so just a quick backstory on this. So I got to tell you. So Scott Clark is the leadership at Daniel.
Correct.
referencing.
Yes. Yeah.
Scott Clark, you guys have heard
All
about him on
biz.
the show. All biz,
Yep.
you know, War Room League legend and the commissioner, or at least the insider of the War Room League, sends me a text at some point over the summer and is like, "Hey, what are you doing the weekend prior to Labor Day weekend?" And I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, I've got 2 young children. By the way, I did not have a kid this offseason. So that was new.
Congratulations.
We broke the streak 2 in a row, so that was cool. Actually, I don't know. Maybe again one day
We'll
soon.
see. We'll see. Yeah.
No news there. But anyway, so Scott texts me, and I'm like, God, about to give away a bunch of Sundays for work, which is a great blessing, but I'm sure my wife would be thrilled if I have to go travel somewhere. He's like, are you available for potential travel? And I'm like, well, it's my boss. I got to say yes. He's like, okay, I might have something for you. And I'm like, and sorry if this offends you if you're from this area, but I'm like, Scott's definitely about to send me to like a speaking engagement in like Erie, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
That was like, to me, like best case scenario outcome in my mind. Then he follows up like 10 days later. It's like, so about the Bahamas trip. I'm like, did you mean to send this to your wife? Like, I've been in ESPN. This is my 13th year at ESPN, and I swear Detroit was the coolest place I've traveled. And that was like 2 months ago, and it was like 12 degrees for the first night of the NFL draft.
Right.
So thrilled beyond measure to be going to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
I know. Our little show, we once upon a time did a show down at Wide World of Sports in Orlando, and it was so much fun because we got to do the show. It was draft season. We were talking about all this stuff with actual fans live and just had a weekend with them. There's nothing like it. I mean, this is really going to be fun for us.
Seriously, if you have never, this would literally be a draft of a lifetime that you will remember. This is definitely going to be a game changer for us, being able to go to the Bahamas and do this big draft. It's going to be a ton of fun.
We all agreed, by the way. We did tell Scott, and we are just 3 employees, and we try our best to be selfless when we can. And we did tell Scott that we have agreed to do this in perpetuity. So every year we
Every
agreed.
year we can go
It
back.
took some time, and we thought about it. We had a long, lengthy chat over Zoom, but we finally agreed that we'll go back next year and every year thereafter.
All right, so go sign up. Bahamar, BAHAMAR.com/draft if you want to get some more info on it to be able to figure out how you and your league can come out there and draft with us.
We'll save it for a later date, but there is a story about Daniel having to get a passport.
You know what? We'll make our way through that story. Well, we're still TBD on how
Be
that will end.
prepared, kids.
Yeah.
You never know when you're going to get asked to go to the Bahamas.
I got one more thing that I want to bring up that I think is very important. Stephania, you have been gone a little bit because obviously you got a lot of camp stuff that's been going on. You've been traveling a lot. And one of the things that you have done was you went to Boston to be able to meet up with our buddy, Matthew Berry.
did.
Did you know that? You did.
I did. I do know that. I do.
You knew
I'm
that.
aware.
In case anyone else didn't, Stephania went out there. The FSGAs, and I got to tell you, Stephania, I could not be more thrilled to have found out this news. You were honored with the 2024 Game Changer Award presented by Matthew Berry.
I was. Oh, look, there's a picture.
And there's a photo of
There's the GOAT and Matthew
yeah,
Berry.
Yeah.
I got to tell, wow, there's the GOAT and Matthew. That was good.
Yeah,
That was
one
good. I
pick
got
up
it.
on
I got it. Stephania, this is incredible. Matthew, obviously, in working with the FSGAs, they created this Game Changer Award for people that have helped change the fantasy industry. And obviously this year, I know that you were honored with that from Matthew. I just want to talk to you about what that means to you because I was pumped on your behalf.
It means a lot. And anyone who was in that room that day, and Mike Clay did show up. Don't feel bad.
did.
Guys.
I saw that.
Mike Clay came. But
Did you see the intro videos that we taped for him at least? Oh, they were great.
Oh, they
they
were
might have
pretty
got
good.
cut, but they were hilarious.
They were pretty good.
In any event, everyone knows it was Matthew Berry. I've told this story before. He's the one who brought me into ESPN, brought me in when I was trying to get this idea of injury analysis off the ground. And how lucky was I that very early in trying to get this off the ground, I landed here at ESPN. It was Matthew who opened a lot of doors for me. So to this many years later, have him present me with this award, it was a big deal. And even he said nice things for a long time when he introduced me, which I had not heard
Not
in
used to that.
17
How
years.
many umbrella
You know,
drinks did he have?
I
Yeah.
know. Clearly, Beth influenced the introduction.
That's right.
But he said so many nice things that when I got up on the stage and I was, speaking, he actually made me cry. And I was like, that is just something that's never happened with
You're not usually verklempt.
Aside from bad rankings calls in the past, yes,
That's
you've
right,
never
yeah.
cried
I
from
know.
something Matthew
I know.
said.
So it was
Kidding,
really
kidding.
not just him, but the FSGA board, the industry, having so many people there who I respect a great deal, who were there to celebrate it with me. It was really quite special.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, Stephania, you're here all season long. Obviously, you are not just Matthew Berry and the game changer for fantasy, but I feel like this is one of the roles you're going to play for us because, Stephania, I did a piece with you on Outside the Lines. Speaking of being a game changer, I don't know why my name is attached to this, but we got to do a little piece on the decline of running backs, which has already aired. Where can people go check this out if they haven't seen it yet?
Well, I actually reposted a tweet from my producer, AJ. Shout out to AJ who worked his tail off on this. We had some challenges. We had the internet going down. We had me being overseas. We had off season for folks to try and be involved in participating in this. But and I want to stress, it's not the decline of the running back per se, it's the decline of their compensation.
Sure.
And really what we talked about is if you look at what running backs used to be paid, and you maybe saw that little shot of Emmett and Troy Aikman where their salaries were on par with one another, and the thought of a quarterback and a running back getting paid the same amount in this day and age, you just don't see it. And I don't think you realize till you watch this piece how low their compensation is, and we go into the reasons why, thanks to Dan Orlovsky and Lou Riddick, who also contributed greatly to the piece.
Heck yeah.
But there's this one guy who we're going to talk about. I mean, this really sets up our topic for today with the tiers, which we'll get into, that if you're not at that elite level, you might not be compensated in the way you think you should be. And yet you talk to players, and players around the locker rooms, they know the value of the running back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what. Running backs, definitely from a contract perspective, a little bit devalued. I have not seen anyone get a Jordan Love or Tua type deal, $55 million a year. Can you imagine a running back getting that much money?
Happen?
That would
never.
That would never happen right now.
5,000 years from now, maybe because of inflation. But yeah.
But let's talk about this. All right, so Field, we're going to dive into your tiers, and I want to mention this quickly before we do this.
Yeah.
We talk about rankings all the time. I've got this guy as my running back 8. You've got this guy as your running back 10, right? But tiers are really valuable outside of just looking at rankings because of the way that you can group people together and say, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a fall from running back 7 to running back 8. Why do you think tiers are so important and not just looking at rankings?
Yeah, you kind of got to the spirit of it right there, Daniel, because the reality is maybe early on in ranking at each position, you can kind of make smaller tiers within the first 10 or so of players. I opted to do 8 total tiers for 50 running backs. So these tiers are a bit broader, including at the top. But the reality is when you're parsing between a running back at RB17 versus RB19, and we're going to get into some of these names, the reality is you're talking about players who likely have a comparable level of skill, pretty comparable or similar role, maybe a reasonably similar offense as well. So how are you really breaking the tie, right? The answer is you might just find one player to be slightly more talented than the other, or you may say the backup for running back B is superior to the backup for running back A, so he might lose a bit more time. So I find tiers to be a very instructive and useful way to think of players across all positions, and you can also create tiers for players regardless of position. So when you're thinking about the very top of the draft board, hey, if I have 7 guys in my tier 1, you might think that, hey, being that first 7 picks of the order is most important. So we have tiers. We're going to do running back tiers. We're going to do wide receiver tiers tomorrow, quarterback and tight end tiers later in the week. Try to keep it between 6 and 8 per position, and generally speaking, 10 or fewer players per tier. You don't want to have a 30-player tier because at some point that just indicates laziness. Yeah, that's like, come on. A little more effort into this one, big guy.
Yeah, that's a thing Mike Clay would do. All right, so let's talk about your tier 1 Field, Yates. How many people you got in there?
Yeah, so we got 3 running backs in tier 1. I'm calling this the tier of players that it would not surprise me at all if they finish as the best running back in fantasy football this season.
That's the title of the tier.
Yeah, you could probably. That's
a long title.
Oh, I just thought
it's like a Michael Scott
my
some
tiers,
business
my
papers
titles.
Know how business still is. Yeah,
right. I am the assistant to the regional manager of this podcast, so I can make the tier names as long as I choose for them to be.
All right.
And as a result of that, I went very long out of the chutes. You could probably say that Christian McCaffrey deserves to be in a tier by himself. We did this mock draft exercise over the summer. If you've been listening to the summer shows, you heard us reference these. We did like 35 mocks. He went first overall 34 out of 35 times. That being said, in the interest of getting a few more names introduced, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, if you didn't see the graphic right there. And I want to talk about Bijan Robinson in this context because I thought it was a fairly narrowed gap between he and Breece Hall for the second running back. I don't know that last year was absolute rock bottom worst case scenario for Bijan in that Atlanta offense. I think it was absolute worst case scenario for the pass catchers in that Atlanta offense. But as a running back, regardless of how good your quarterback is or is not, pretty easy to turn around and hand the football off to that player. That being said, I think this is going to be a massive, massive leap for the Atlanta offense this upcoming season. I know people realize it's an upgrade going from Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota to Kirk Cousins. I don't think people know just how much of an offensive upgrade it is. Like, it is such a massive gap between Kirk Cousins and the two quarterbacks that started last year in Atlanta, which will have a ripple effect, a much better scheme as well. I think Bijan is going to go insane this upcoming season, mostly as a runner, but also he's such an incredible pass catcher as well. I know that coach speak can be nauseating because there's, generally speaking, a ton of optimism and not a lot of like, well, we're kind of concerned about this for Bijan. That being said, Stephania, they're saying all the right things about getting him involved in the correct way. Breece Hall is a superstar talent. I think Bijan Robinson in a vacuum is a slightly more talented player, which is why it was so close for me to choose between those two guys as the next up beyond CMC.
So interestingly, Bijan was one of the players featured in my piece on running back. So I had a chance to sit with him. Our piece, yes, Daniel, our piece.
I appreciate it.
But in talking with him, he really understands that the more you can do, the more versatile you are, and versatility is the key.
Yep.
The more you're going to be on the field. Being on the field creates opportunities, and then you get the ball in your hands and you score. And it wasn't just him telling me these things. And listen, we had a long conversation. This young man understands all these different facets of the game beyond just running and carrying the football. And he got that start at Texas, which I think, yay, Jonathan Brooks, we'll talk later on. But it was also the conversation I had with their new head coach, Raheem Morris. And I was down there right after Christian McCaffrey had signed his deal. And when the coaching staff was talking about how they were going to emulate some of that in the way they utilized Bijan Robinson. And legitimately, some of the things that they said were specific in terms of how they plan to use him differently. So It's not just smoke. Like you said, this is actually tangible plan where they plan to integrate him more so that he is touching the ball more frequently.
The last thing I'll say here is, although we are focused on the stuff that's new for Atlanta this year, there are some good incumbent things working in Bijan's favor, including the fact that last year he averaged 5.3 yards per carry on rushes up the middle behind one of the best interior offensive lines in all of the NFL. That was the second best of any running back in the league last year. So if they focus on Bijan as a between the tackles runner, that can be good things. I think it would be a whole lot more than just that. But for a guy who feels like he was kind of a disappointment last year because of the hype, 8 total touchdowns, well north of 1,000 total scrimmage yards, nearly 1,400, actually more than that, more than nearly 1,500 scrimmage yards for Bijan. So a guy that talented in a souped-up role in a much better offense, it screams breakout. Really, we were robbed of what should have been a breakout season last year for Bijan as a rookie. All signs pointing out for Bijan in year 2.
I think part of that field, and it's not trepidation, but when I look at your top tier, the other two guys don't have a guy behind him that had nearly as many touches as Tyler Algier. He had 200 touches in that Falcons offense. That's obviously going to change here.
Yeah.
We're not expecting Tyler Algier to be nearly as involved in this offense as he was last year.
I think he'll have a role still. He's a solid player. He had 1,000 yards as a rookie. I don't think it's going to be as involved this season. And, the Jets drafted back-to-back running backs in the 4th and 5th round this year. Breece Hall was not as efficient as a runner as Bijan last season. So I think I hear you on that, but I'm still bullish enough on Bijan. I don't think you can take a player 8th overall at a position that is being devalued by the league and expect him to be anything more than the Ferrari every single week.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, so tier 1 makes a ton of sense. Those are my 3 guys as well. Who you got in your tier 2?
Yeah, I've got 5 players in this second tier. So it covers running backs 4 through 8. I'll read the names: Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Isaiah Pacheco. And my tier, again, long, just for you, Daniel, is a really strong running back option, a top 20 player overall. Heck, wouldn't surprise me if all these guys are going in the first 15 or 18 picks of your draft. Again, I think you could have made a smaller tier within this tier of JT and Saquon Barkley. But I want to talk about Jonathan Taylor. Remember, this time last year, 2 years ago, we were talking about Jonathan Taylor as the consensus #1 overall player in fantasy football. Obviously, last year was a cluster, right? I can't swear on this show. So it was still a cluster. I forgot. New season, new studio, same rules as it pertains to being a family company here. JT had a cluster situation last year. He misses the first 4 games, PUP, contract. This year, things are looking better. Now, Jonathan Taylor came on strong down the stretch last year. In his last 5 games, he had 6 total touchdowns. He was very effective as in a runner in 3 out of those 5 games. We started to feel like we saw the Jonathan Taylor that we were accustomed to in the years prior to that, and the Colts offense kind of felt like it once again ran through Jonathan Taylor. The big question mark I have for JT this season is fairly straightforward. Jonathan Taylor last year without Anthony Richardson, because remember, they did not overlap at all. Has 2 factors that I'm very mindful of. One is the fact that I will continue to contend that Anthony Richardson, one of the breakout players in fantasy football this season, is amongst the best short yardage options of any player, regardless of position, in the NFL.
Agreed.
Josh Allen may still be the best. Anthony Richardson, not that far off. Jalen Hurts also in that conversation. Is he going to continue to see as much goal line work as he did in that very small sample size last season? Moreover, how involved will Jonathan Taylor be as a pass catcher this year? He is an excellent pass catcher. He has shown in the past he's a terrific receiver. The question, though, is will the volume of targets be there for him like it would be if it were a different quarterback he was playing next to? Just go look at some of the most mobile quarterbacks in the NFL. Not all of them, but a lot of them tend not to throw the football to their backs as much. Those plays are kind of substituted by quarterback runs. Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, amongst the kind of obvious names to mention when we're talking about that statistic specifically. And JT last year had 74% of his fantasy points via rushing attempts. That was the 6th highest amongst running backs last year. So he was not getting a lot of his damage done through the air. That being said, way too many good signs. I'm very optimistic about this offense. I think if you listen to the Fantasy Focus during the offseason, you know that already. And the talent play here is just too good to ignore a player not even into the prime of his career in what could be a great offense again.
Yeah, a healthy Jonathan Taylor, which doesn't hurt either, and a healthy Anthony Richardson. I think the concern for people might be, well, Anthony Richardson, they're not going to run him as much, and then so they know it's a run play, and they're going to focus on Jonathan Taylor, and it's going to be much more divided out, teased out in terms of what Anthony Richardson can do. And I'm here to tell you that is not the plan. Yeah. And I think that fact that he can be a threat is going to create opportunities for Jonathan Taylor. I think, to your point, Field, you're going to see the offense really start to look like what I think we thought it could blossom into by late last year. Anthony Richardson was out by week 5 or 6. So I think what we could have seen towards the end of last year is what we're going to start to see from the jump.
Yeah, I don't think the offensive line's quite as good. But 2 years ago, Shane Steichen, now the Colts head coach and de facto play caller, offensive coordinator as well, along with Jim Bob Cooter, ran the Philadelphia offense. Mm-hmm. And we saw Miles Sanders go nuts. I mean, insane, right? He was like second in the NFL in rushing. Better offensive line back then. But I think you could see a similar situation for Jonathan Taylor. Yep. He may not have 65 catches this year, but if he has 35 catches and runs for 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns, he will be a top 5 fantasy running back this season. Excellent, excellent player. Everything, once again, aligned. Second time I've said that for a player. It's aligned for JT this year.
I actually have a question not on JT because that makes sense, and he's easily in my tier 2. There's one guy in this list that I have in my tier 3, and I have someone else in my tier 2.
Okay.
So my question is, you are quite bullish on Isaiah Pacheco jumping up into this tier 2. What is it that you like about him this year in Kansas City? Because my concern is, I know they didn't add anybody, but it feels like there was like this is an addition by addition. They added 2 pass catchers. They want to get Patrick Mahomes to be able to have a better season this year. Understanding they didn't add anyone at the running back spot, why do you think that you are more bullish on him?
First of all, awesome player, right? I mean, this guy is the Chiefs just freaking crush it in the draft recently. He was so good last year as a rusher. He was just such an effective player for them in that regard of the game, but also had a much more expanded passing game role this season. And you're right. There are more pass catchers this year than there were last season that we trust going into the year, right? Beyond Travis Kelce, you got Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy also in the mix. Jerick McKinnon, as their primary pass-catching running back over the past few years, has seen a very fruitful role. And even when they had a bunch of guys cooking, right? Like last season was not the only year that Jerick McKinnon was effective. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, when Patrick Mahomes was the number 1 passer in terms of yards in the NFL after trading away Tyreek Hill somehow. It was Jerick McKinnon who had that game of that streak of 8 straight games with a receiving touchdown. The passing role should be awesome for Isaiah Pacheco, and maybe having those additional threats around Patrick Mahomes creates even more light boxes. Last year, teams probably felt like they could compress the box and just sort of dare the Chiefs to run the football. They did. Throw the football, and I think that like Isaiah Pacheco is in a better ecosystem this year for big plays plus receiving opportunities. I'm in. I've got him as RB8. So I think Isaiah Pacheco, who I will never spell his first name right. He's the only Isaiah I know, Isiah. I'm in.
I'll tell you what.
Okay.
You mentioned this. I looked it up last night because I was curious. When you look at defenders in the box, he was top 5 in fantasy points per touch when you have 8 or more defenders in the box.
He's already good in that regard, right? Because he runs angry. The guy is pissed off at the grass every time he has the football.
It's the way he runs.
It is the way he runs. Yeah. So the idea that, like, hey, if you load guys at the box, he was one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL last year.
He had a great offensive line too, right?
Of course.
That's a mash unit up.
So maybe you add to this point, like getting to where you're at. You add a couple of pass catchers. Maybe you have some lighter boxes. Okay, this is only going to make things easier, ideally, for a guy that runs as well as this.
Yeah.
The one in this tier for me that gives me a little bit of concern is Kyren Williams. Mostly injury. Just really, can he stay on the field? We saw last year. Remember, there was a point in time where he was on the field for like 99% of the offensive snaps, and clearly that is too much. Again, I will be a running back apologist forever and ever plus a day, and this is exactly why. Because a player like that gets utilized so much that their injury exposure is high, and then he's not the biggest build running back, right? So he's
small tank.
Exactly. Okay. So, but that exposes him to injury risk, which we saw have an effect. Now, we know that they drafted Blake Corum.
Yeah.
And so my personal draft strategy, we were doing all these mocks, is if I landed Kyren Williams, because I do think he will be amazing, and I know they have big plans for him. Sean McVay loves him. But I want to have Blake Corum because there might not be the ability to have Kyren Williams carrying the load that he might start out with.
Yeah, Corum, one of the most important insurance policy running backs
we'll talk
in all
about
fantasy this season.
Yeah.
Definitely going to make one of these.
You mentioned Sean McVay, something Kyren Williams. I'm not saying that because it's like my Lord Voldemort. He who shall not be named.
Yeah, he who must not.
Because a couple of years ago when we talked about how much Sean McVay loved Cam Akers.
Yeah, well, we know what happened.
I'm not going to say that. Except I did just say it.
Yeah.
Anyways.
All right, let's talk about Tier 3 field. I'm assuming that you're going to start off Tier 3 with a guy I would have had in Tier 2.
Okay, so the Tier 3, by the way, is guys are going to give you lots of RB1 weeks with some RB2 traits.
That's fair.
Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs. Why don't you I'm assuming you want to make the case for Derrick Henry in Tier 2?
I would make the
case.
case.
Go for it. I mean, I don't strongly disagree with you. He is right on the border for me, but
yeah,
I want to hear your thoughts.
I don't love, I understand he's getting up there in age, and especially for a running back, that's a thing we got to worry about. But last year, I watched Gus Edwards have 990 total yards from scrimmage and 13 touchdowns in this Ravens offense. And I don't want to be rude to Gus Edwards, but he's just a guy in comparison to Derrick Henry.
Just a Gus.
It's not wrong. You're not wrong. So you add Derrick Henry into this offense, and if you said to me, Daniel, there's one running back that you would project to score 20 touchdowns, 20 rushing touchdowns this season. Who do you think it would be?
Probably David Montgomery.
Don't. See, you're pulling on my heartstrings when you do that, Field. I think it's Derrick Henry playing in this Ravens offense with the way that he played last year. This Ravens offensive line is going to be much better than he saw in Tennessee, without question. So for me, the idea of the upside, I understand there's going to be probably, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier when talking about Jonathan Taylor, there might be a dip in his passing game usage, knowing that he's going from a quarterback that would find him a little bit easier in those dump-offs to Lamar, who might use his own legs rather than dump off to Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
But I still would have Henry in that RB or in that Tier 2 because of that rushing touchdown upside.
Yeah, I put him in Tier 3, and I have him 9th overall amongst running backs, so I still love the player. But the possibility of being old is in play here, right? Like,
absolutely.
Running backs, as Mike has reminded us a million times, like it goes from like playing really well to all of a sudden a shell of themselves. I'm not expecting that for Derrick Henry. It's a remade, but still, I think, better offensive line in Baltimore than Tennessee. I have him as my RB9. But the guy that I want to talk about within Tier 3 is James Cook.
Ooh.
I'm wondering whether we will be talking about James Cook in a different light by the end of the season than we were at the end of last season, which is a pretty darn favorable light. There's a lot to like about James Cook. Top 5 in the NFL in rushing yards last season. 1,122 yards on 237 carries. Quick math, it's about 15 per game for James Cook. That's a good number. He averaged over 10 yards a catch last season.
Wow.
That's a huge number for running back.
That's really big.
It's massive. Oh, by the way, on 44 receptions. So 44 receptions for 445 yards. There's one problem with James Cook, and I don't know if this problem can be solved. Scored 4 touchdowns last season, including 2 rushing touchdowns. That's it. If you go ahead and look at all the running backs with at least 150 rushes last season, James Cook had just 12.5% of his team's rushes within the 5-yard line. Oof. That was the lowest percentage of all those guys who had at least 150 back. So of the guys that are workhorses, he's also the least kind of goal line dependent back of any of them that we think could be back in that same.
They have this other running back named Josh
number
Allen.
17, who I think, by the way, might be the NFL MVP this season. We'll talk about that on a later show. I don't think that's going to change. Stephania was talking about these coaches say things like, we want to be smart about our quarterback. And then the games begin, you're like, holy crap, Josh Allen's rushed the ball 13 times in week 1.
Not changing.
Coaches think one foot in front of the next. GMs are like laying the foundation and then planning are we going to insulate the walls properly? Like, are we going to get the roof that might cost a little bit more but last for 40 years, right? Coaches are like, can we just get to the next play? I'm trying to get a first down or a touchdown here. So that is the biggest question mark that I have for James Cook. He profiles in ways to me as a tier 2 running back with that one major problem, which touchdowns are quite important last I checked.
I mean, as long as the volume stays high, I had him on my War Room League team.
How'd you do in that team?
I might have won the league. Might have won the league. You might have won the league. I think we're going to mention that. It's going to be talked about the entire season.
You want to reveal the tattoo now or no? Wow.
We'll save that for later. Maybe
Bahamas.
I'll bring there's a lot that's probably going to happen there that does not happen on the show. Anyway, Josh Allen also likes to throw the ball. He doesn't just run the ball. He will throw the ball short yardage into the end zone. So I agree with you. I don't necessarily see it changing. But I also think the pure volume of James Cook makes up for it in so many ways.
Yeah. That's why it was harder for me to drop him any lower than RB12 this season, going into the season, because he's such a talented player, big play waiting to happen. Felt like they kind of unlocked him once Joe Brady took over as the play caller. He has been very bullish in both his words, but also his utilization of James Cook.
Yeah. All right. Not a lot to argue with there in tier 3. I actually see things fairly similarly. So let's move on and talk tier 4.
A little bigger here. 7-player tier in tier 4. These guys feel like RB2s to me in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Rashad White, Kenneth Walker III, Devon Achane, Aaron Jones, David Montgomery, Ramondre Stevenson, and James Conner out in Arizona.
Field, we just talked about Rashad White on a recent show where he had the second most touches, only 3 fewer than Christian McCaffrey last year. Now he's in tier 4 of your running back.
Correct, Daniel. Bucky Irving, name to know. He was drafted in the 4th or 5th round out of Oregon. And I don't want to... Mike Clay has already reaped the venom. Rashad White,
yeah.
I don't want to undercut the accomplishments of a player who was terrific last season.
He was.
It was a wildly inefficient season as a rusher. It was like the yards per reception was very low. The indicator was that a ton of dump-offs last season went to Rashad White. Bucky Irving not only was an excellent between the tackles runner at Oregon, behind a great offensive line, he was maybe the best pass catcher not named Dylan Laube amongst the running backs in this past year's draft class, who ended up going to the Raiders in the 6th round. Sleeper. Anyways, so that's not the player I want to talk about, though. I want to talk about Devon Achane. And before I get to that, I think, Stephania, do you have any concerns? Do you have any concerns about the injury here on Devon Achane?
No, I mean, I think he showed he was fully recovered from it. I think what was interesting last year, he had the MCL injury, hip drop tackle injury. We're maybe going to hopefully see fewer of those. But it was the fact that when he came back, he was still tentative. Then he had to miss a little more time. And, part of that's adapting to the NFL and understanding what it means, what it feels like to play hurt, not being fearful of that. And he is also a slighter build. But they're always going to do what they do in Miami in terms of balancing that workload, right? But what he showed us that he could do when given the opportunity, I think he will continue to have those moments. It just may not be week in and week out. That's where you're gonna be challenged.
It's an important part to think about going into the draft season. Is what are you expecting out of this player? The guys at the top in tier 1s are guys that you expect from week 1 to week 18 to return value, right? At some point on the board, you start to find guys that are not going to be 17-game players, but could they be elite for 8 games, 10 games? And what we know with Devon Achane is it might only be 8 or 10 games of being awesome based off what we saw last season. but those 8 or 10 games could win you the week every time he plays. That's how electric this player is. Stephania mentioned the slider build. In the NBA, we talk about this all the time. Now, maybe it's because there's so much more focus on load management, 82-game season, but like there are players who we've just accepted, like you get like 50-ish games out of that guy per year. HN may just be one of those running backs. You get like 12, 13, 14 games out of a season because he's tiny. He is pint-sized. He is more prone to injury when you can tackle him, I would think. I'm not Stephania, but the smaller you are, in a lot of ways, you're probably, Derrick Henry has held up well for a reason. He is built like a left tackle who happens to be incredibly chiseled and plays running back as well.
Spends a lot of money on his body in the offseason.
And it's worth every penny for him. But Devon Achane is one of the trickiest players for me to rank. On the one hand, you have this obvious force of Devon Achane showing when he has the football, given the scheme he plays in and the speed he brings to the table and all the other great traits he has, he is a big play waiting to happen. He broke every metric Mike created last year when he was on the field. The other force is that he could miss some time due to injury. The team is not going to rely upon him every single week in a massive role. Raheem Mostert had 22 touchdowns last season. They used a 4th-round pick on Jalen Wright out of Tennessee, who, oh, by the way, is like the fastest running back in the entire draft. Miami did not draft him and trade a 3rd-round pick next year. I know.
Miami loves the
off-brand,
speed.
right?
I know.
Right?
So he's a tricky player to rank in a lot of ways. But ultimately, I decided that it's not often I'd find a player inside my top 17 for running backs who I might be willing to live with 5 or 6 weeks of either dud production or like not being available. But that's how special Devon Achane is. He's that special of a player.
Well, I think the thing is, too, when he was on the field, more often than not, you got incredible production.
Yeah.
So it's when it's more about if he's missing the week, at least you know you have somebody that you have to plug in.
Right. Yeah.
And if it's when he's on the field, there is always the opportunity because he has that crazy agility and speed and burst that he can scoot and get you 70 yards in a single play.
Yeah.
He can't. I mean, I don't know how much, some people might find this stat valuable. Some people might find this stat not valuable, and they might just say, like, this is the analytic nerds just doing stuff again. But last season, Devon Achane averaged 2.82 yards gained over expected.
Yeah.
That was double the second highest of any player with a minimum of 100 rushes. That next player was Christian McCaffrey at 1.41, so it was slightly over 2.82 for Devon Achane. So the question is, Mike Clay might be sitting somewhere watching this show right now. Love you, Mike. Saying like, hey, regression's happening right now.
Yeah.
Or other people might say, no, like when you've got a player in this scheme with that speed, you're bound to have a guy near the top of the leaderboard.
So you mentioned it earlier, too, where it's like if Devon Achane broke Mike's efficiency metrics, then what did 31-year-old Raheem Mostert, like, did he cause Mike to retire? Because, I mean, he broke all metrics as a running back last year as well. And when you look at this situation field, it's not as easy as quantifying, like, do you just take Raheem Mostert's touches and all the value that came from that? Like, that was an outlier of a season.
Here's the thing. Raheem Mostert in any other scheme is not the player that you see. This is really an example of, and we talked about this in the piece, you can have all the talent in the world, you can have all the skill set in the world, and you not being meshed with the right play callers, working in the right offense, it doesn't matter because it's not going to show up either in real NFL or in fantasy productivity. And I think in this case, because it was Mike McDaniel who brought Raheem Mostert there, knowing he had worked with him in San Francisco and could plug him into this scheme the way he does. It's also part of keeping Raheem Mostert on the field is getting the Devon Achane and the Jalen Wright. So the system they have worked out, you couldn't duplicate that anywhere else, but it's also helped Mostert achieve longevity. And because he was a journeyman who didn't play that much in the early portion of his career, his load has actually built up later in his career. So if you look at number of years in the league, that's why he defies all these expectations. He doesn't fit the typical profile.
I have no idea how to quantify what Raheem Mostert looks like this year in comparison to last year when you've got a guy like Devon Achane and a young, exciting rookie like Jalen Wright waiting in the wings to be able to see what can they be for this offense.
Well, I've got Raheem Mostert in my tier 6, Daniel, if that answers the question.
Okay, well, that answers the question.
We're not going to talk about him that much. It's RB 28 because we've got another player that I think is so fascinating that I'm less optimistic on than most. Scott Clark, by the way, has brought to my attention via text. Isaiah Thomas spelled his name Isiaah. So, my bad. If you took that personally, I owe you one.
Wow. How dare you, Field?
I'm assuming that's Isaiah Thomas, the basketball player for the Pistons, not for the Celtics.
Celtics. Isaiah Lord Thomas III spells it the proper way.
More
biblical way.
Isaiah Thomas. Okay.
Proper.
Yeah.
Proper way. Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh,
right.
it depends who you're talking to.
You're talking to a Detroit native right here, or a Detroit sports native. That's
Because I feel like I've seen his name spelled a lot, and it's how I expect it.
expected to be spelled. That's
All right. Anyways, I digress. Tier 5 time.
Let's talk about tier 5. This tier looks a little bit smaller, Field. How come?
It is small, and I had a hard time. Because I finally reached a point where I was like, I'll draft you, but I'm not totally excited.
Okay.
The name is, we'll give you some RB2 weeks, but has some RB3 traits. It's 4 players only.
Okay.
Amir White, the Raiders, Zach Moss, DeAndre Swift, Javonte Williams.
Okay. Actually, all these guys kind of make sense now that you've explained the name of the tier.
It's
That
like,
kind of
you
fits.
like when you're sitting there in your draft room, if you walk away with any of these guys as your RB2, you're like, I better hit on one of my lottery ticket running backs there on out. But when you get them as your RB3, you're like, I can jive with like DeAndre Swift as my third running back who's going to play occasionally, It just feels a little bit different. I want to talk about Javonte Williams, though, within this tier. Stephania, we talked about this, and it's been, thankfully, we have not had a running back at the very, very top of the heap come off of an ACL tear the year prior. But we had, there was a period where it was Dalvin Cook one year and then Saquon Barkley the next, and we were talking about this a ton. The history of that has shown that more often than not, guys need a full year back on the field or the remainder of the season once they get on the field to kind of find their form, and then year 2 is when they hit their stride. I'm going to chalk a lot of what happened last year with Javonte Williams up to that. I still don't know if Javonte Williams is an awesome player or a pretty good player. I think he's a pretty good player. Not totally certain he's going to be an awesome player, but last season, 3.6 yards per rush. That was the second fewest amongst running backs with at least 200 carries. Only Josh Jacobs was worse. Now, you could say that those two have a commonality, which was a not imposing passing game that they were operating within the same offense of. But if you think about the Broncos' offensive line and some investments they've made, right? They just made Quinn Miners a $20 million per year guard.
Yep.
Lloyd Cushenberry signed the biggest center contract in free agency this offseason. It's not like Javonte Williams was running behind a bunch of scrubs, so you're kind of sitting there. Mike McGlinchey got $20 million a year last year from Denver. Garrett Bowles has been a good player. This is not a terrible offensive line. So I do think a lot of this was that Javonte Williams was simply not himself. Probably not physically, maybe mentally as well. I have been fortunate to avoid an ACL tear. I've been unfortunate that I'm not an NFL player, but I can't imagine
You win some, you
it's
lose.
the easiest thing to go back to being your peak performance self coming off of a legitimately significant injury.
And his was worse than most. I mean, it wasn't just that. It was also this LCL injury, which was something along the lines of what J.K. Dobbins had. We saw how he struggled in that first year back. What was shocking to me was that Javonte Williams was playing at all at the start of the season. I remember he had his injury, was surprised that he was deemed ready to participate in competition that early. Now, they did sort of work him back into a couple, I believe he got some preseason action last year. But if you look at how many times he touched the ball, he had 13 carries the first week, 12 the second, 11 the next, and then he had an off game, but then it pretty quickly boosted into 27, 21 carries. That's a lot of work coming off a significant knee injury where you really didn't have acclimation to competition beforehand. If you look at what somebody like Breece Hall did, where it was much less workload early in the season, first few weeks, and again, his was a clean ACL. What it does to your knee, how it changes your dynamic on the field, your agility, and he's also a tough runner, but you're not as strong. You don't have the same power initially coming off that injury. Now there's been reports he's lost a little weight, better conditioning, because that's what Sean Payton wanted. We'll see how he and the coach mesh in terms of what he does this year. But I felt like it was a little bit unfair to judge that whole season when he was easily working his way back for the first half at least, and because he came back quickly, I wonder if he ever was able to get up to what his potential really could have been had it been stretched out a little.
So I'm betting on the bounce back. I know that they drafted Audric Estime. I still think it's Javonte Williams leading the way in this backfield. And Daniel, congratulations, you are now a Washington Wizards fan.
Yes.
Keith Lipscomb just reached out to me and told me that Isaiah Thomas, as in Detroit Pistons Isaiah Thomas, was ISIAH.
Interesting.
So hopefully you like French players.
Yeah.
As the
That's
Wizards have drafted back-to-back Frenchmen.
Yeah, I'll have to figure that part
Bilal
out.
Koulibaly last year, and
I
then
think Victor Wembanyama is my favorite French player. Is that fair?
Well,
sure, yeah.
certainly the
He's
tallest.
French, right?
Yeah.
I guess he's certainly the tallest.
Yes, he is. How about Alex Sarr, the Wizards' #2 overall pick? Who he actually may not be French, but played in France at one point. Who went 0 for 17 when you include the 2 missed free throws in a summer league game this season.
I saw that.
We're a basketball show now, people.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Want.
All right,
My favorite French player, honestly, is Tony Parker. I love listening to him talk about stories about how Tim Duncan didn't like him early in his career. If you've never seen it, go check it out online. It's very, very fun.
You're 6?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you one question.
Please do. Go.
Maybe it's not a question, but it's an observation. I talked to Stephania a little bit about Javonte Williams pre-show as well, and one of the things that we noticed in looking at this is yards per rush. His rookie season, 4.4.
Yeah.
Last year, they were 3.6. Almost a full yard less, right? Yards before first contact. His rookie season, he was at 1.8. Last year, he was at 1.8. So it didn't change at all. Yards before first contact look exactly the same.
That's usually a blocking stat. Right?
Correct.
Like, these guys are giving me the space to run.
Yards after first contact, 2.57 his rookie year, down to 1.6.
bad.
So almost a full yard lost after contact, which a lot of this goes into what it feels like we were talking about. A guy potentially not fully back to his return to play after what was a major, major knee injury.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
lot to watch there for Javonte Williams. Also,
Chunky Tiers coming up.
is it fair to say that Sean Payton is like one of the biggest wild cards when it comes to coaches in the NFL? Could you be?
He's up there, right? Because you're like, there are times where you're like, yeah, it would make sense to feature this player, and Sean's saying all the right things, and then like next thing you know, he's been traded.
Right.
Jerry
like we
Jeudy,
bring in
like elite route runner, all this yada yada yada.
And then
it's like,
sometimes it's like it
congratulations,
feels like his
you
coach
are
speak
Brad.
index is low.
well, go follow the Coach Speak Index on Twitter.
They're good.
Help
All
you
right.
out.
Like you said, tier 6 field. We got a couple committees here.
Yeah, this one's big. It's 10 players, so I apologize in advance to our entire, well, I guess in retrospect, to
Is
our
that
graphics
lazy?
team.
Yeah. Oh.
This is these are RB3 profiles for me. Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson Jr., teammates, of course.
Teammates.
Raheem Mostert, Jalen Warren, Najee Harris, also teammates. Jonathan Brooks, Tajay Spears, Tony Pollard, teammates again. Devin Singletary, Ezekiel Elliott. All right, so
Not to take a stab at any one of those backfields where you've got committees, huh?
that's the problem. So let me ask you guys this, and we don't need to dive in deep into the players, but is there a single name on that entire panel where I said it and you're like, let's go, I'm super in on that player this year? Like, I'm not like at cost. I mean, you're like, I actually think a massive year is incoming for Devin Singletary.
Massive?
No, I don't
Okay.
think.
No.
I don't
All right,
think
so we're sort of speaking the same language right now in terms of the overall value for these players. If I had to guess the name that people that are fully invested in fantasy would maybe vote the most for would be Jonathan Brooks. Maybe it's shiny new toy syndrome. Maybe it's the fact that he's the rookie and goes to a team that really could use a running back upgrade. But I'm nervous about Jonathan Brooks. I really am for a lot of reasons. Tore his
A lot of
ACL
reasons. Yeah.
in November of last season. November. All right. So he's still, and this is the July 29th show. So if you see this clip or listen to this show later and he's off NFI, my apologies. He's on the non-football injury list. When you come into the NFL from college injured, they put you on the NFI list versus the PUP list. But think of it like he is on the PUP list, not practicing yet. Could he be activated at any moment? He could. Do I think the Panthers have every reason to be very smart about how they treat this player?
Yes.
Yes, because he's got the ability to be a starting level running back in the NFL for quite some period of time. Young player. He was not in college for a super long period of time. This guy is not a 26-year-old who need to get on the field now because you got to maximize the window.
I was going to say, are you in a window with the team even? It's not even the player window. Is the team in a Super Bowl
yeah,
window?
and while I don't think that anybody else on the Panthers depth chart gets you fired up about the running back depth chart, it's not like Miles Sanders after what we saw last year, super exciting. Chuba Hubbard's been solid but never spectacular. Took a flyer on Rashad Penny this offseason. Like, they've got bodies in the backfield. This could be a committee. Last thing I'll say, while they did invest in the offensive line heavily this offseason, they spent $153 million combined on two new guards. I think this team's going to really struggle this year. They're doing the right things. They're making progress. I thought some of the moves they made this offseason were very sharp, but there was a talent gap there that really needs to be accounted for, and it's hard to do that just in 1 year. So I'm concerned about Jonathan Brooks. I have found myself fading him during that mock draft project.
Same, and mostly because I think the cost is too high for what I'm expecting in the first year. Again, We just talked about it with players coming off an ACL injury and what your expectations should be. And the fact that we're really not at 1 year, which is when players start to really kind of emerge into themselves. 1 year won't be until November. Plus, he's acclimating to the NFL. Plus, there's a stat, I've dropped before about players coming into the league with a history of an ACL injury have a 1 in 4 chance of tearing their ACL again within 22 months. That's there's something there, and the best way to prevent something like that from happening is to really make sure that they are coming back when they're at full strength. So I love Jonathan Brooks. I love him in Dynasty. I'm not sure that I really am going to expend the draft capital on where you would have to take him, where he's going in fantasy drafts, because people are looking at the potential and they're thinking he played behind Bijan. He started having that same role. He's a guy who can do multiple things. Yes, he can, but he's also new to the NFL and not getting the practice experience right now. Yeah. So let's give him the grace of getting up to speed. And it might not be this season.
This is another one of those things, too, where, it would be great if he came out and was just a wicked pass catcher, out the gate.
He's capable.
And he will be.
Right?
Could be.
Because this is not going to be a team that I plan on scoring a ton of points this year. Like the Panthers, just in general, their offense is
also
going to be limited.
Yep. So I had, prior to the injury, I thought he was a top 40 player in the draft, which in the climate we're in for a running back is pretty good, right?
The NFL draft.
NFL draft,
Not
yes.
this
Excuse
draft,
me.
yes.
And then he gets hurt, and that changed my grade to, I had him as 57th on my overall big board. So he drops to the bottom of the second round. He ends up going in the middle of the second round, a totally justifiable slot for him. Patience is the key. Let's get to tier 7.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Please do.
On the spot here.
Rip it.
Tier 6. If you had to pick one of these guys to potentially outperform their tier 6 slot for you, do you have one person that you feel like is maybe in a situation, or are they all kind of same?
I'm deathly afraid of my Raheem Mostert ranking.
Because of the fact of
he can just be half as good as he was last year and be a top 20 running back. I mean, it's just the offense. Anything could happen in that offense.
A million touchdowns last year.
I don't know what to do with Najee or Jalen Warren. I love both of them, and they got Arthur Smith as their OC.
That's my biggest fear. Pittsburgh running backs, I feel like I want no part of it. Maybe it's just because I still have nightmares from last year in Atlanta, but I don't get excited about either one of them. I know they have to play.
Yeah. Jalen Warren's more exciting, but there is a respect organizationally to Najee Harris. He would never go away. So
feels like it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, kind of bleh.
Let's talk tier 7.
Yeah.
Field. Who you got in tier 7?
All right. So there's a path to an RB3 profile for me on these 5 players in tier 7. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. You might notice a lot of players that are teammates being ranked back to back when we get to this portion of the rankings.
Yep.
Including Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford. And finally, Chase Brown, who I could be convinced to move up higher there.
I like Chase.
I'm going to talk about Jerome Ford here, but it's going to lead into naturally a Nick Chubb conversation. I am growing slightly more optimistic about Nick Chubb's recovery time, coming off of a massive, massive injury last year. But I will continue to remind people that the Browns themselves are stopping short of putting any sort of timeline on him. So someone's going to have to be the running back for the Cleveland Browns until Nick Chubb returns. They did add Deontay Foreman, Nyheim Hines, recovering from an ACL tear himself. Jerome Ford was not super fun. Was okay last year. Okay. And now he's being drafted, RB39 is going double-digit rounds now. Averaged nearly 13 fantasy points in PPR scoring between weeks 3 through 17 last season.
Isn't 13 fantasy points a flex play?
Now, it was definitely up and down, right? Some weeks better. It was not particularly efficient.
Of course.
But his offense, I think, envisions a better version of itself this year than it was for much of last season. Deshaun Watson, finally, I think, healthy, although we'll still see on that one. Anyways, Jerome Ford, I think, is fine at this spot. I am closely monitoring every Nick Chubb update that I get like a hawk because obviously, if Nick Chubb returns, not right away does Jerome Ford become irrelevant, but if Nick Chubb returns and there's no setbacks, it might be like a 4-game runway before Jerome Ford is strictly a backup again.
What does that look like for an older running back? How does he return?
This one makes me so nervous.
Nick Chubb?
Yes.
I mean, they made him take a $10 million pay cut, too. $10 million pay cut.
The thing is, I want to emphasize this again, and Nick Chubb, if you're listening, the player, one of my favorite runners to watch in the NFL,
Agreed.
is a pure runner, beautiful to watch, admired by all running backs in the league for that. The organization also did the right thing here, standing by this player who's clearly been the focal point, the lone bright spot on an offense for many years, right? And he has this terrible injury where he basically dislocates his knee, the same one he dislocated in college. And yes, you go back to college and like he put up 2,000-yard rushing seasons. That's how he got drafted and ends up becoming this star in the NFL. But you have virtually another similar injury, not identical in terms of what was damaged, but equally traumatic injury to one where I rarely look at an injury and think, oh my gosh, career might be threatened. But I think everyone thought that, including the people who were taking care of it. You don't know until you're able to see what you can do. A stage surgery, meaning they had to do 2 parts to it. So his, even the surgery to get him fixed, so to speak, took a long time. And then it's the recovery aspect. Now, nobody might work harder. I mean, obviously, we've seen video of what he's posted, what he can do. But that's still a far cry from doing what you need to do on the field in terms of being able to move and play, et cetera. Yeah. My other fear is that when he starts to come back, if people get excited, then the utilization gets too high, and immediately there's a secondary injury. Yeah. We know that deceleration is a huge problem coming off of ACLs in isolation. You have a multi-ligament knee injury. It's like your knee doesn't even totally know where it is in space. There's so much to get back, and I think... Now, here, I'm removed from it, right? I haven't seen his knee. I haven't been up close. I'm only speaking from a distance, but you would hope that the smart move would be allow him to get back. In other words, when he takes the field, maybe he's just having a few carries at a time. You know, I feel like the workload shift will be, and I don't even know. We don't know yet if he's going to be able to start the season on time. But until we hear otherwise, I would not expect him to start on time. And then I would expect the balance to shift only in terms of, you know, after a game, how does knee feel? How is he, you know, all of those things. So I think where you have him, I would agree with that. And everything else.
I'm lower on him than our consensus ranks by about a half dozen spots right now.
It's icing on the cake if he.
That's all. I keep saying gravy. You say icing on the cake. Or speaking the same language.
I like cake.
I like cake too. I'm going to have some Baja Mar, by the way. See you in a few weeks.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. All right. Field, we got one more tier here, tier 8.
Yeah,
this wraps up all the last of your 50.
These are my depth level pieces, 41 through 50. Tyler Algier, Rico Dowdle, Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet, Ty Chandler, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Marshawn Lloyd, Ray Davis, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'm going to talk about Trey Benson in just a moment because I do love the player and I mentioned him so many times this offseason. But I want to give a little bit of air to this notion, is that there are guys on this list who might not play at all, who might just get like 3 carries a game. I'm not drafting them because I expect them to have a significant role in week 1. It's the potential for what they could be if something, unfortunately, an injury, leads to them having a more significant role. I like these guys as backup running backs better than other backup running backs who might actually have a bigger role week in, week out. Specific to Trey Benson, though, if you listen to the podcast during the offseason, you know my affinity for him coming out of Florida State. Big play waiting to happen. A tackle, forced missed tackle machine. Averaged over 10 yards per catch as a receiver. Arizona's in this weird category. There are a few teams that fit into this where I'm like really optimistic about way things are trending for this team. And yet I'm still not totally sure this team is going to be very good because they play in an excellent division and a not super deep NFC. But the league right now feels like there aren't a ton of terrible teams. So anyways, Trey Benson, I'm optimistic on. James Conner has never played a full 17 or 16 game season before the 17 game switch took place. I think Trey Benson is far too valuable. If James Conner were out, I would value Trey Benson as a top 25 running back, probably even higher in a given week.
Wow. So that was going to be my question when I look at this tier, and you mentioned it, right? Obviously depth level, but like Tyler Algier is the backup to a guy you have as a tier 1 running back.
Yep.
Zach Charbonnet backing up, Ken Walker as a tier 3 guy.
Yep.
Trey Benson, you just mentioned. Blake Corum backing up a guy that's in tier 2, and same with Marshawn Lloyd.
Yeah.
And Ty Chandler.
Corum's kind of like Trey Benson and Ty Chandler in that regard, just defying his point. It's like, and Ray Davis, you're one play away from like probably being the guy. Like, I love Marshawn Lloyd. He's a really talented player. Green Bay might go by committee if something happened to Josh Jacobs.
What I would say to your tier 8 players that you're talking about in this situation is it makes the guys who are ahead of them, to me, they're valuable draft picks right now. Like Aaron Jones is going so low, and I don't really understand it because, first of all, they're not going to have their tight end to start the season. What?
Mike's been calling him old for like 3 years.
Well, you know what? Aaron Jones has something to say about it. First of all, a guy who, Green Bay, he was the heart and soul until he wasn't.
Yep.
But also, look how he finished the season. Everybody's talking about, he was hurt. look how he played when he came back and he was healthy. Aaron Jones will start strong, and I believe he'll be heavily utilized in that offense. But if he does get hurt, then you've got Ty Chandler there. So I think, like, to me, I'm looking at these guys as a package deal because you can probably get the starter, James Conner in Arizona, for a huge value pick in the mock drafts we've been doing.
Like 8th or 9th round right now.
Yeah, right now.
I mean, in 10-team leagues, obviously it changes.
It's tough to see this list if you're a Chiefs fan thinking that the 7th round draft pick, Isaiah Pacheco, was what you thought the first round pick of CEH was.
No, it's not. You know why? 1, 2,
okay.
3
all right,
rings.
all right.
For
The
the
championship rings. All
I don't
right.
give a crap about anything right now. Life is good.
That's fair. If you had to pick one of these guys in tier 8,
Yep. Trey Benson.
an opportunity opens up in front of them, right?
Yeah, Trey
And we
Benson.
don't want to, you think he would be the highest ranked guy on the list?
Yes.
Okay.
Blake Corum, a close second. Because while Sean McVay has relied heavily on Kyron Williams, I think you would do the same on Blake Corum.
If something happened to Kyron, Blake would just fit right in as the guy.
This studio is so sweet.
I love it. I love it.
I keep looking up to see if there's somebody that we're getting a little nugget on somebody.
Maybe
we're
Mike
talking
Clay, like a
about
Mike
right
Clay
now.
highlight.
I
Just
know.
like
Oh, I hope not.
I like that Go Brees Lightning.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us.
Before
First
we go-
show back. Sorry, Stefania.
It's my mom's birthday.
oh my
The
God.
day is.
Mama Bell.
Can we say happy birthday to my mom?
Oh, my
Happy
my-
birthday, Mama
birthday,
Bell.
Mama Bell. I'll have Kinley sing her. She is obsessed with singing Happy
Oh,
Birthday.
well, my mom would love to hear it.
Oh, happy birthday, Mama Bell. We love you so much. We love all of you for hanging out with us. Thank you so much for being here. Day 1, we are back tomorrow,
I can't
10 a.m. Eastern time until the rest of football is done. We love you guys. Be kind to each other. Be good to yourself. We'll see you tomorrow.